Niger school leaders have met with the 14th Emir of Kano in the capital, Niamey. Talks between Sanusi Lamido Sanusi II and the junta came ahead of an emergency meeting of the West African Regional Bloc, which holds today. ECOWAS is calling for the restatement of ousted President Mohamed Bazoum. Sanusi briefed President Tinubu on his visit. In an exclusive with Arise News, he touts his commitment to restoring peace in Niger.
I can't tell you what I discussed with the president.
We saw you earlier in Niger today. Is that what you discussed with Mr. President ahead of ECOWAS meeting tomorrow, sir?
Yes, I came to brief him on the details of my discussion with the leaders of Niger.
Would you say your intervention was positive, successful?
Interventions are ongoing, and we'll continue to do our best to bring the two parties together to improve understanding. This is a time for public diplomacy. It's not a matter that we leave to governments. All Nigerians, all Nigerians need to be involved to find a solution that works for Africa, a solution that works for Niger, that works for Nigeria, and a solution that works for humanity.
There are also reports that you took this initiative by yourself and you're not the government's delegation.
No, I'm not the government.
Okay.
I was not sent by the government.
Okay.
The government officials were aware I was going, but it was my personal initiative using my personal contacts to get there, and I will continue to do my best. It is my duty as a leader to do that.
But
in his maiden speech.
meanwhile, ECOWAS, chaired by President Bola Tinubu on Tuesday, resolved to impose financial sanctions on individuals and entities believed to be supporting the military junta in the Francophone country. But in the meantime, a former rebel leader and politician has launched a movement opposing the coup in Niger. It is the first sign of internal resistance to last month's coup. Risa Agbula says that his new Council of Resistance for the Republic will restore ousted President Bazoum, who has been in detention at his residence since the takeover, and then subsequently he resigned. Bula also expresses support for ECOWAS and other international actors seeking to restore constitutional order in Niger. Joining us now on the morning show to discuss the ECOWAS Niger crisis and Nigeria's involvement is Ambassador M.K. Ibrahim, a Nigerian diplomat who served in 6 countries, the last of which was Libya during the government of Colonel Gaddafi. After his retirement, he was elected the first chairman of the IOC Independent Human Rights Commission based in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. Good morning, Ambassador Ibrahim, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning, and thank you for the privilege of being on your popular program.
Well, Ambassador Ibrahim, earlier on this program, I was trying to make a distinction between state parties and actors who are covered by the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations 1961 and the role of non-state actors, and how in the last 48 hours we have seen many non-state actors taking an interest in the crisis in Niger. Emir Sanusi has been there. We have seen bishops writing under the auspices of ECOWAS and saying, look, this is what we want. We have seen political stakeholders in Niger writing the ECOWAS chairman and directly ECOWAS leaders and saying, look, sanctions should be lifted. We have seen Sheikh Daouri Bauchi leading a group to also meet with President Tinubu on this particular subject. Now, of what effect could be the intervention of non-state actors or diplomacy, you know, as the Bible tells us, being really a relation between states? And of course, you can see how the same Niger that snubbed the ECOWAS, snubbed the EU, snubbed the US, snubbed the UN, snubbed delegations sent by President Tinubu, gave free access to Emir Sanusi, meeting with the coup leaders. Now, what's the significance of this? And of what effect could it possibly be in the context of the current, international diplomacy crisis that we face in Niger?
Thank you very much. The coup in Niger is like no other one. It has defied, many things, and it's one of the saddest political developments in the ECOWAS region. One, we're all happy that for 12 years there was no coup in Niger, which had the dubious distinction of being a coup-prone country. And after a successful election transition from one democratic government to the other, that was additional credit, to Niger. The president of Niger, Bazoum Mohamed, did very well for the country. For the first time in more than 20 years, there have been positive changes in the economy of Niger. Growth rate has increased from 1% to almost 7%. He has succeeded in reducing the budget deficit of the country from about 30% to just about 17%. Inflation rate has reduced. And the prospect for even further improvement in the economy was very obvious. And then, like a bolt from the blue, the coup came, which really surprised everybody. The leaders stonewalled every move to bring negotiation, as you have mentioned. And thank God, now soft power diplomacy seems to have worked at the right time, because this visit to the coup leader by Khalifa Sanusi II is probably the only positive development, to report. And this is coming barely 24 hours to the meeting of the ECOWAS authority of heads of states and government to review the decision that they had taken on the 30th, of July. So it's nothing new. Soft power diplomacy has been around. People use their influence, their contact, to see if they can bring even warring parties, together. The government of President Tinubu had tried that. And for the first time that I am aware of, someone as high as the Sultan of Sokoto, not even during the Civil War, was that used, was sent as a delegation, of the president to go and negotiate, with the coup leaders. But as you have said, they stonewalled everybody. So we are happy with this positive software diplomacy of Khalifa Sanusi II.
All right, thank you, Ambassador Ibrahim. I'd like to ask, especially since you served in Libya under the government of Colonel Gaddafi in terms of as a diplomat, the Reunion of Episcopal Conferences of West Africa have said that we should learn lessons from the tragic occurrences following the intervention, the military intervention in Libya. And the question or the conversation in the last few days has been military intervention or no military intervention. What are some lessons we can learn from the Libyan experience? Or would you say that in this case, we have to apply some form of military force?
No, I have never believed that it will get, to that, even though in the declaration of the authority of the heads of state, ECOWAS authority of the heads of states and government, they have reeled out several sanctions, including the possible use of force. But the use of force is always as a last resort. The president of Nigeria, President Tinubu, and the chairman of the ECOWAS knows his responsibilities and obligations under the Constitution of Nigeria, under the UN, treaties. So you just don't attack like that. This is a sort of deterrent. So there are a lot of lessons, to learn, a lot of lessons. One of the lessons, I think, people seem to be looking only at what is ECOWAS doing or not doing, what is Nigeria doing or not doing. And I think for Nigeria, there should be a three-pronged approach. One is the bilateral aspect because of our strong bilateral relations, with Niger, coming out of factors of history and geography. Two, of course, there's the ECOWAS. Nigeria and Niger are both members of the ECOWAS and have signed the protocol of democracy and good governance. And the third aspect of it is the external factors. Countries, powerful countries that are in Niger, who also have a role to play in getting resolution to this quagmire that we have found ourselves. Particularly, I will mention the United States, and France. Whatever happens, we have to, especially as Nigeria, to find a way of navigating through this three-pronged, approach. Now I'm talking about lessons, and we're beginning to see the junta has tried to revoke all agreements Niger had with France. And the French simply told them that they signed this agreement with a legitimate government, and they will not allow an illegitimate government to revoke, this agreement. This is to tell you that they are even challenging the sovereignty of Niger. So that is one. Two, we have to be conscious of the fact that the coup is not 100% accepted. Mainly now it's in Niamey. Bazoum, who is of Arab stock, has a lot of sympathy from the Tuareg group in Niger, which had tried to rebel against the government of Niger for almost 10 years. And as you mentioned in your introduction, they have already started sending signals that they will come back if the government of Bazoum is not reinstated. Two, there could also be a way of bringing internal problems in Niger, to bring different factions. That is what happened in Libya. We must be very careful about factionalizing, this situation. And that is why ECOWAS head or tail must act appropriately to end this crisis or let it not linger for a long period. And I believe this is what Nigeria is doing. That is what President Tinubu himself personally, in spite of the difficulties, is doing. As you can recall, probably, within 24 hours of the coup, a strong delegation was sent to Niger. That was a quiet diplomacy not many Nigerians knew. And as I mentioned, they did not give the necessary cooperation, the expected cooperation, to this first, delegation, which was not even announced. And they have stonewalled everybody since then. And that is not good, a way of resolving the situation. People talk of diplomacy. If two parties are not talking to each other, then diplomacy will not yield any successful result. We must know our differences. We must know what these coup leaders want. We must know their own thinking of how to resolve, the situation we have found ourselves.
Okay, so let's talk about this escalation tendency. We all know that Niger has had its own fair share of problems with rebels over the years. With this rebel group, the CRR, coming into the picture, is this not a full-blown escalation? Because now they are saying that they're going to mobilize. And if they mobilize, probably they're also going to be reprised by those that are in support of the coup plotters or the coupists here. So, coupled with also the case we hitherto have of Boko Haram across the fringes and the Tuareg rebels, and rebels from other parts that are constantly filtering into Niger. In all of this, then the case of also France, there's a story that was not amplified as regards French troops attacking some Nigerian guards yesterday. That's the first bit of escalation in all of this. Are we not brewing already an armed conflict in Niger?
That is the specter of the unfortunate situation that could crop up in Niger if immediate action is not taken. If the situation is factionalized, then it becomes extremely difficult. At best, ECOWAS could be talking to one or two, and I mentioned the external factors. Don't be surprised. The French or the Americans would not like to lose out in Niger. They have many ways of causing trouble when it comes to that. They may support one or two other groups, and that will complicate the case like it's happening now, in Libya. And that's where the Libyan example should serve as a lesson, to us, especially to Nigeria, because one way or the other, there is no way Nigeria will fold its arm to what is happening in Niger. It's too close for comfort. Even now, there is already a story that some of the Nigerians are flocking into Sokoto and Katsina. And if it gets worse with the very porous borders that we have, it will be a big problem for Nigeria. Two, the question of arms coming into Nigeria, that will even increase the inflow of arms, small arms, and light weapons into Nigeria. The question of banditry will be even worse because it will distract all the efforts that we are making to control the banditry in the Northwest. Attention now will go over the border to see how we can handle political situation. And that is why it is absolutely necessary for the President of Nigeria, both as the chairman of the ECOWAS and the President of Nigeria, to find ways and means of making sure that this situation does not escalate more than it is at the moment.
Well, Ambassador, you have made the point that ECOWAS leaders should ensure that there is no escalation. But they are meeting today. What are the specific options that you will recommend to them? Will you say they should meet the coup leaders halfway and probably recommend a transition program of maybe 1 year, 6 months, within which there should be a transfer of power to a democratically elected government? Or will you say that they should go back to the ECOWAS resolution, which may be impossible? And what do you think beyond ECOWAS is likely to be the response of the international community? After all, Germany, France, the U.S. and, which other countries that they have military bases right there in Niger, and this happened under their watch. What would be your specific recommendations in terms of options?
Well, the options are not much. And when you mention halfway, since the coup leaders have not been forthcoming in stating their demands, so you find it difficult to know which one is 1/4 way or half or even full. We're only hoping that now that they have opened up to the discussion they have had with the 14th Emir of Kano, which we don't know what has been discussed. I'm sure he must have briefed the president, and after the meeting of today, we will start to have some idea of what will be the next move. But you have mentioned this basis. This is a factor that we should take seriously, because this government, the current regime, personally, no matter how hard they try to play the ball, I don't see them lasting long, except and until they begin to listen to the international community, to ECOWAS, and to apply some sense of common sense. It's not only these countries that we mentioned. Even the United Nations Secretary General has made it categorically clear that the coup leaders must restore democracy in Niger. This is not an easy task. We have seen the example in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Guinea, where the tendency is to say, okay, you give us 1 year or you give us 2 years, and then we'll start, we'll conduct an election. We don't want this to be the trend, because actually it did happen in Niger in 2010. They came in under Colonel Salou Djibo, and ECOWAS wanted them to stay for only 6 months. They refused. They say that they should be allowed to stay for 1 year. Thank God, after 1 year, they conducted an election. In the case of Mali, in the case of Guinea and Burkina Faso, there's no sign that after 2 years, they will go away and conduct a free and fair election. And if we allow this to be as a precedent, as a general trend, then God help us. Who knows which other country will now, the soldiers will come out from another country and say, we want 1 year, we want 2 years also. And once they are in, as you can see from the experience of even Nigeria, it's not easy to send them, back to the barracks.
All right, Ambassador Ibrahim, I'd like to ask, and I'm glad you've talked about trends. We've seen this trend in the last 3 years, especially in the Sahel region and West of Africa, where the countries you've mentioned, Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, have undergone coups. Are there certain lessons to learn? Because as you've mentioned, the reason why the world is watching Niger, and particularly ECOWAS, is that if this continues, what country will then come next? What are some of the lessons to learn from these coups, and how can we stem it for the future to sustain and deepen democracy in the South, in Africa as a whole, and West Africa in particular?
Yeah, that is a very germane question, and at the same time, a very difficult one. We're always taking up lessons. In the case of Niger, that has defied any rational reasons, because the government of Bazoum was doing extremely well. Many countries in Africa would love to have Bazoum as their president. As I have told you, there have been a lot of progress within this period of 2 years. He has brought certain reforms. He was tackling corruption. He was reviewing some of the agreements Niger had signed back to the time of independence, especially the case of their uranium and their oil deal with the Chinese, which is strange even by oil-producing countries' standard. And there's just no reason for the coup. People will always, there are people pointing out that if you don't want a coup, then you must have good governance. And here is a case of good governance, and yet there is a coup. Of course, bad governance is a quick attraction to coup. But in this particular case, this is a case of good governance, and yet there is a coup. And that's why ECOWAS should take this particular case more seriously than it has done for other countries. It's a big challenge, one, to ECOWAS, and in the particular case of Niger, to Nigeria.
Right. You've said and talked about the fact that, yes, there are lessons to be learned. And let us even go back into the role of another actor in this Niger crisis that is not speaking, but yet is watching. That's the role of China. We all know what China is doing in Niger, because in all of this, China has not said anything. But China has a lot of interest, including the Soraz refinery in Niger, and also a lot of oil exports. Let's talk about what China is playing in all of this, because nobody's talking about China.
Well, which is very comfortable for them. But Bazoum recently said that they have to review the agreement under which the Chinese are exploring, the oil in Niger. And not only that, Oriva, which for the past 60 years has had an absolute monopoly on the mining of uranium, in Niger. So Chinese, yes, the government before they were toppled realized this, and they were trying to make, to review the agreement under which the Chinese are exploring, the oil in Niger. There is one factor which, unfortunately, I haven't had much being talked about, which was the former president, Mohamed Yusuf. I don't want to mention too much about that, the former president of Niger. His role also in this coup, even though it is allegation, but he had personal interest in the oil in Niger. And he made, when he was leaving, he made his son as the Minister for Petroleum Resources under the government of Bazoum. These are some of the internal frictions in Niger that have also effect, in this coup. Very little is being mentioned, and I hope the Nigerian authorities will find a way of finding out the role being played by the former president, and if he can be used in resolving the current quagmire in that country.
Well, Ambassador, you've been full of praise for for President Bazoum. You've been saying, reforms have gone very well, he has done very well, and this is a case of a good leader being removed by his own people. But that's not the narrative on the streets of Niger. During the recent independence anniversary of that country, there were persons coming out supporting the coup leaders, just as now we have people supported by the Tuaregs from the north. So is this really about identity politics? I mean, Bazoum, a minority who became leader over majorities, and I had asked this question before on this program. You know, one of the things he did was that nobody in his government should take 2 wives. So there were concerns about the pace of reform going too fast. But you are full of praises for him. So is this something in terms of the lesson that Ayo pointed to that we can learn about ethnic and identity politics in Niger, which is also a major issue in Nigeria? Very briefly.
I'm glad you have mentioned Nigeria also. But all these positive indices that I have mentioned about Niger, I'm not a researcher on Niger. These are figures coming from the World Bank. These are figures coming to international organizations, you know, that are monitoring the development in Niger. These are figures coming from donors. And yes, it has played a big role in this situation. And unfortunately, this is happening in many African countries. Bazoum is from a minority group. And it was even very surprising how he was able to make it to be elected, you know, as president. I believe Bazoum himself had never, ever thought in his life he would become a president in Niger. But then this is the reality. And now we have to grapple with it. It's coming in a negative way, not in a positive way that a minority is, someone coming from minority is becoming the president of a country. But now the ethnic problem is coming out in the form of the conflict, or it may come in the form of the conflict in the country.
Well, thank you very much for your perspectives and insights this morning, Ambassador M.K. Ibrahim. Thank you.